With the release of the new TONEX software coming up here in a couple of weeks, I've been thinking a lot about how I'm going to be rearranging my pedal board. And one of the things that I was thinking about was I make heavy use of a volume pedal, and I place that between my TONEX and my wet effects. As I was thinking about how I'm going to integrate these new effects that TONEX has, I got to think about how I'm going to integrate volume. If I put the volume pedal before the TONEX, that's going to be affecting the gain coming into the TONEX. So even though I'm running an overdrive pedal before that, it's still going to be sending less signal into the amp model. I really don't want that. I want the amp model to respond to the full volume of the guitar coming through. But then if I place it after the TONEX and I use the TONEX's delay and reverb and all that, and I volume down, that's going to cut out any of that wet effect as well. Now, while I'm still going to add in some additional wet effects after the TONEX, I am going to want to use the TONEX effects by themselves sometimes, and if I volume down, I don't want that to cut completely out. So let me pull up a simplified image of my board here so that I can kind of explain what I'm talking about and then the solution that I'm going to try to use. So currently I'm coming in through the daylight and nightlight pedals from Pedal Train, going into the TONEX, then going into my Boss volume pedal, and then into my wet effects. Then also I use the Ampero control from Hotone, or Hot One, or however you say their name. I don't know. Maybe someone from there can contact me and tell me. And then, so then I use that as a MIDI controller for the TONEX and for the X-Bass reverb. And as you can see here, I also have a little Ampero switch, extension switch, so that I've got 6 buttons total for my MIDI control. So after realizing that this Boss volume pedal probably isn't going to work in this new setup, I figured it was going to have to be some kind of expression controller that I used to control volume. So let me pull that in here. So just to keep things consistent, I've brought in the Hotone Ampero Press. I think it's a relatively inexpensive expression pedal. I think it's 60 bucks or so right now on Amazon. So the first thing off the top of my head is that I would take the Ampero Press and use that as an expression pedal for the TONEX. Come into it something like this, and then set this up to control some kind of volume or gain setting in the TONEX. Looking up in the documentation for TONEX, it looks like the best place for this to control is going to be the model volume, because that seems like it comes at the end of the amp model, but before any of the effects that are post-amp in the TONEX chain. So this expression controller would just need to be programmed from like 0 to 10 or 0 to 8 or whatever the max model volume I want to use is. So that was my first thought. But then what I saw was that the TONEX, as far as tap tempo goes, is it's going to have a switch where you have to go into the tuner mode, and then one of the switches becomes a tap tempo. And then you press another one of the buttons, and that gets you out of tap tempo / tuner mode. This is one of the reasons I really didn't like the Boss DD6, and I ended up using a single loop pedal to just leave that in tap tempo mode all the time and shut it off with a secondary switch, which was kind of annoying. So what I also have heard is that you can use an external momentary switch as a tap tempo switch. But the thing is, you're going to have to plug that in to the single plug in the back of the TONEX for external control. So I'll pull a tap tempo switch out onto my board here. But of course, by doing this, I've gotten rid of my expression pedal, and now I only have my tap tempo pedal going into my TONEX. So that brought me to the idea that I'm going to have to control the model volume using MIDI. Luckily for me, I've already got some MIDI on this setup, and the Ampero control has 2 external inputs for expansion for control, and they can both be used for either a single switch, a double switch, or an expression device. So what I'll do is I'll leave my Ampero switch as one of those so that I still get my 2 extra switches, but then I'll plug in this press as an expression controller and then map that to the MIDI commands for the model volume. Overall, my plan is going to be that each one of these buttons on the Ampero control is going to be an on-off for a different effect. And if the MIDI mapping for the new TONEX update includes the ability to change modulation effect or delay effect or reverb effect. I might map like one to a hall reverb and one to a spring reverb, one to the tape delay, one to the digital delay. But if not, then each one will have to be per preset on the TONEX, whether or not it turns on a digital delay or a tape delay or whatever. And then reserve the 2 external buttons for what might be my 2 main amp models that I would use in a live situation. So that's something to think about as you're looking at adding the TONEX FX update into your pedal board. If you were thinking about dropping some of your wet effects off your board to maybe consolidate to a smaller board, if you do use a volume pedal, this is something you're going to have to consider, that you're not going to be able to use an external tap and an external expression controller on the TONEX at the same time, at least not from what I have seen so far. So you might have to look into some kind of MIDI control for your TONEX to control that model volume and still get that swell effect that you might want to get. So anyway, I thought I'd share that idea that I had, and hopefully you can take care of that before this patch comes out. So when it does, you are ready to just integrate this into your board in some new cool ways. I'm sure some of you out there will come up with some great ideas far beyond anything I can come up with, and I really look forward to seeing what people do. So until next time, I'm Johnny, and I'll catch you later.